I shall never lose hope, and my people shall never lose hope. In fact, we expect that the work will go on.
By the late 1960s, the African National Congress, the organization which had provided such a clear vision for a democratic future, was hardly in evidence inside South Africa. Many of its most prominent leaders were serving life sentences on Robben Island.
When I say that the government succeeded in crippling the organization, I mean exactly that.
To reorganize ourselves in that situation was a new battle. We started with by napping stones in the yard. You have to fill in so many wheelbarrows for the type of work we were doing. But we resented this type of a thing, and we wanted to fight this legally as far as this was concerned. They now recognize the leadership. We wanted to talk to Mr. Mandela and recognize that he was the leader of the group, and they exchanged views and explained to them that we would not accept this type of harassment. And the very fact that they now recognize him as a leader was an important victory for us.
It did not dampen our spirits at all. If anything, we realized that we had to prepare our membership to be ready to carry on the struggle outside jail when they were released. And they did.
We never allowed to see our morale to go down. We were not allowed papers, not allowed news even from your families, but we were able to try and get whatever paper we could get in the old dams where, you know, rubbish was dumped there. Able to get these small pieces of paper, collect them into one, and read them at night as a newspaper, and later even at the quarry. And we kept on that way, and we were kept informed of what was happening throughout the world and the country.
I joined the ANC and SACP underground as a young student in 1968. And it was a very, very lonely experience. The political movements had been smashed, effectively. What was left of them was in exile, was in prison. Key leaders had been banished. Those who had avoided the net were very quiet and silent. I mean, the apartheid regime in the late 1960s could have been forgiven for thinking that it had succeeded absolutely in smashing opposition forces.
Under the then Prime Minister, John Vorster, the economy grew at the unprecedented rate of 5% per annum. A sophisticated military force was developed and deployed, land and people divided. For blacks, it was a time of extreme oppression, poverty, and hardships. For whites, it was a golden age of privilege.
I believe that we, the whites, the coloreds, the Indians and the Bantu, will show the world that we have not only found the solution to the race problem in principle, but that we will also prove it in practice.
While the white government felt sure of its invincibility, the ANC in exile had already begun to test its own strength. In 1967, Umkhonto we Sizwe had joined the anti-colonial war in Rhodesia as part of an unsuccessful attempt to penetrate into South Africa.
People talked about ANC in whispers, within the townships. There was a lot of exaggeration about us. We became a myth. These young South Africans coming back, storming back, and fighting, the Rhodesian forces.
That idea that there are people outside who are fighting was already planted, but one didn't know how and whether that was possible.
The bloody anti-colonial struggle in Vietnam, the protests of the American civil rights groups and the militancy of the Black Power movement also served as an important source of inspiration to black South Africans desperate for change.
In this country, you were to think that white people were God, that they had the right to give us our freedom. We must stop seeking to imitate white society. We must create for ourselves to save our very humanity. We are black. Our noses are broad. Our lips are thick. Our hair is nappy. And we are beautiful. And we are beautiful. And we are beautiful.
Somebody says there is no greater force in this whole world than an idea whose time has arrived. An idea whose time has arrived. And that idea, ladies and gentlemen, is black consciousness, which is going to free the black man from the shackles of white imperialism, white slavery, white oppression. Power!
During this period, black youth were increasingly drawn into the education system. It was here in the racially segregated universities that a new philosophy of resistance began to emerge, that of black consciousness.
Any changes which are to come can only come as a result of a program worked out by black people. And for black people to be able to work out a program, they need to defeat the one main element in politics which was working against them, and this was a psychological feeling of inferiority.
In 1968, the ideas of black consciousness found formal expression in the launching of the South African Students Organization, SASO.
The essential quality of black consciousness was the desire to be able to give black people the opportunity to make decisions about their own future, rather than wait for handouts, which was the kind of attitude that had been inculcated by NUSAS and liberal organizations that existed prior to the formation of SASO.
At that time, there was no other political organization that I could find a home in within the country. And secondly, I actually did believe that the African community in particular needed to take charge. It needed to shed the idea that they are inferior and that they cannot take decisions for themselves.
The Black Consciousness movement really offered me that hope that as a black man I could actually raise my head above my shoulders like any other body. It constantly reminded me that I was entitled to that dignity which the white man was constantly trying to tremble below his feet and even trying to push below the very dust. That message of black solidarity and unity was very crucial at that stage, because it was offering that message in the context in which the regime was speeding up the process of dividing our people. It was beginning to make the homeland system a reality at that time.
When the new generation came up, it was most encouraging. And we welcomed the emergence of the BCM because in the ultimate analysis, what we want is the freedom of the oppressed people in this country. And it doesn't matter who brings it about. There is nothing as encouraging to a prisoner, a political prisoner, than to know that the ideas for which you are suffering will never die.
One must not forget that was a time of terrible and severe repression. The security police was very active, was all-pervasive, was in every respect also very, very all-powerful.
During that period, I think uppermost in our minds was to make sure that Robben Island was taken care of, whether it was letters to them, whether it was visits to them. And don't think for one moment that people were rushing off to see their husbands and children on Robben Island. Gladly, they were scared.
The years of harassment, of brutality of the regime had left their own mark. They had bred a climate of suspicion, of mistrust. Comrade had betrayed comrade. There were instances where comrades had helped cadres only to be arrested as soon as cadres were apprehended by the enemy. It was very, very difficult.
The decision had been taken that the key to advancement for the ANC was to build up underground political structures. What we were asked to do was to produce thousands and thousands of ANC and SACP and other Congress-allied pamphlets, and we would produce them in an underground garage and then mail them out to thousands of addresses, mainly in the townships. We were also given instructions in how to let off what were called bucket bombs. These were leaflet bombs which we would nervously place near black bus queues near the entrances to train stations with a sort of 10-minute delay and beat a retreat, and these things would go off scattering thousands of pamphlets around. So the idea was very much, one, to indicate that the ANC was still present, that those traditions had not been exterminated. Given the depression and demoralization, the sense of the sort of omnipotence of the other side, it was very important to operate in their backyard and to show that one could get away with defiant acts. In the early 70s, something else began to happen, and that was that some of the middle layer leadership of the African National Congress had been sentenced to terms of 8, 9, 10 years of imprisonment, were beginning now to come off Robben Island and to return to townships. One thinks of people like Jacob Zuma and Harry Gwala in Natal.
When I moved very quick and very fast, touching other comrades who had not gone to prison and those who had left prison. It was clear the contact, the underground was very weak. Where comrades had maintained contact, it was really there but dormant, not planning any other kind of activity in a serious sense. What seemed to have been the central activity was that the old comrades who were known by the younger generation of the Black Consciousness movement had become the centers where some of the young comrades would come to for advice and discussions politically. And that happened in Natal, that happened here in Johannesburg. People like Comrade Gabi, the late Comrade Gabi, for an example, had a lot of link with students and the Black Consciousness movement. That tended to be the main kind of activity of our very weak underground at the point when we came out of prison.
A key part of our strategy during this period was to maximize the isolation of the Pretoria regime. And the conditions for us were favorable. We enjoyed the support of the Organization of African Unity, of the non-aligned movement, as well as socialist countries. In addition, we had managed to build, a powerful anti-apartheid movement in a number of Western countries. This was a period of the intensification of the calls, not only for isolation, but for economic sanctions, for arms embargo, for cultural and sport isolation.
As the booming industry continued, exploitation of the workforce increased. Some wages had not risen since 1911. Working conditions at this time made confrontation between workers and bosses inevitable.
In those factories, in the late 60s and in the early 70s, it was the African workers who were moving into production. And the Indian workers are by and large moving out and moving into white-collar jobs and to other types of jobs. And for the first time, African men and women, because there were quite a lot of women workers in the textile industry, and that's quite a breakthrough, were actually realizing that they had production in their hands. And if they worked, production would be made, and if they stopped, the whole system would face a big crisis.
If you want to know that, you must go to our boss to ask that what the people were complaining about, you see.
We are at the Devon Municipal Abattoirs, where strike negotiations have broken down. But for more on the question, City Councillor and Chairman of the Bantu Affairs Committee, Mr. Louis de Beer. Mr. de Beer, how serious is the situation?
Tony, it's quite serious at the moment, and we're hoping that they will appoint negotiators so that we can negotiate. At the moment, they are not prepared to appoint anyone at all.
In 1973, what began as a spontaneous dock worker strike in Durban sparked a wave of similar strikes throughout Natal.
Then you'd find people marching down streets and then going and banging with sticks on the gates of the next factory and say, come on out. Some people had already been on strike and then they'd come out again just to be part of the demonstration. And they'd snake down the streets and you see the police just shocked. I mean, in the end, they were sort of having to tolerate it.
They fired something on our part. They drew our attention very, very vigorously to the need to push for the formation of trade unions as a necessary pillar in our struggle for liberation.
In the neighboring Mozambique and Angola, the anti-colonial wars of Frelimo and Colombo were drawing to a victorious end. The South African government attempted to halt the protest by military intervention in Angola, but was forced to retreat. The result was an enormous symbolic and practical victory for black South Africans.
Mr. Michel was today sworn in as the first President of the new People's Republic of Mozambique, and he declared his country would be committed to the elimination of oppression and colonial exploitation.
The coup in Portugal, which led then to the fall of these colonial regimes in both Mozambique and Angola, resulted in widespread jubilation within the country, including within the ranks of the Black Conscious Movement, both SASO and BPC.
I was actually observing as they were beaten by the dogs from some flats. But it was such a crucial thing because in the psychology of the overt mess, here was Frelimo, victorious. They actually believed Frelimo could actually march across to South Africa. Samora will command the forces here to help liberate. That was a kind of a psychology, which for our underground was crucial, because then it fed to the underground that kind of necessary militancy and understanding and preparedness of our own people, that if the Mozambicans have done it, why can't we do it? That is why people who were detained for those rallies were ready to go to prison for it. That was another indication that freedom is just at the borders.
For the first time in the history of our armed struggle, we got governments which came into power as a result of armed struggle. Governments which were very close to the ANC, the Communist Party, who shared a common ideology with us. The immediate results was that we had now our own training camps in Angola, where we were trained both by the Cubans and later by the Russians, and where we developed a capacity to train ourselves, began to produce our own instructors. We're able now to send our comrades back via Zambia into South Africa and via Mozambique. We established political offices in these countries. We established underground operators in these countries who were to guide and lead our returning combatants into South Africa.
We began to discuss, not generally in black consciousness, but with people that you felt may be feeling the same. And we began to discuss with them. We began to listen to Radio Freedom. We began to want to talk to other people.
All right, we are now conscious, we are now active, we want to move forward. And what should we do? Should SASO form a military wing? And the people who objected very strongly amongst them were people like Steve Biko said, no, you are not going to do that. We are not going to have a military wing here. Those of you who are conscious and see and have come to the realization that there is no way of changing the system in South Africa except through an armed struggle and underground activity, then you are free to go and join the old liberation movement. And the liberation movement, will find the ANC, will also find the PAC. And those people have got military wings. You can then go.
There was a trip from the medical school which was going to Swaziland. And a few of us who were thinking alike decided that one of the things we wanted to do at that trip was to hunt the ANC people that we'd had were in Swaziland at the time and have some discussions with them. That led to us coming back and forming units within the medical school and beginning to distribute some of their literature.
We penetrated. We developed a capacity to go underground into the country, to meet people. We also opened up lines or routes for people to come and consult with us in Maseru. So, I mean, for the first time, we began now to feel that we're in touch with people, with organization, and with units.
At the end of 1975, the Department of Bantu Education issued a directive to all African primary and junior primary schools instructing them to use Afrikaans as a medium of instruction.
There was a hatred of Bantu education and the use of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. And this was building up. As usual, the regime in Pretoria stepped up repression of young people. Unknown to the regime, there was a groundswell of opposition.
I went to Rene de Villiers, who was then a member of parliament, and I conveyed my concern to him. And I said to him, look, it is of vital importance that you must go and talk to Dr. Andries Treurnig. And I said, he will not listen to me, but he may listen to you, and warn him and say to him, Andries, you people are playing with fire by demanding that Afrikaans should be a medium of instruction to the black community. This thing is going to explode in their faces and is going to explode in our face too. I remember very well that he went, and after a certain time and he came back and he said to me, Beyers, I would just like to say, it was absolutely impossible to convey any other thought or meaning to Andries Treurnig. I'm afraid there's very little that could be done in that respect.
We then decided on appealing to all students by saying on June 16 we embark on a march, a demonstration, and we would be getting to Orlando Stadium, wherein we would draw a memorandum to the authorities.
We thought that time had come for us now to enter the battlefield, get into the trenches and challenge the regime on that issue.
The point is that we had to have the demonstration, we had to object to what we felt was unjust, and we had in fact to organize students to collectively fight to improve their lot. And we thought that all that was virtuous, and we thought that any reasonable person would come to accept and realize the fact that we need and we should be given the right to show disapproval on some of these things.
On the day of the demonstration itself, as we assembled the assembly out there, people began unveiling their placards. And lo and behold, some of the placards were saying, it happened in Angola, why can't it happen here? We heard of the shootings having taken place somewhere in Orlando West. And those were, at the time, that was just pure rumor. A motorist going past just shouting, people are getting shot at the end. The march changed from being a march. We began running, trying to get there in time to find out what was happening.
By the time we arrived, that Hector Peterson had already been killed, and it was no longer possible to proceed. The police were just shooting all around, you see, and effectively the march was broken, but then violence began to escalate.
June 16, 1976 was to become even worse than Sharpeville 1960 in terms of the destruction to property, in terms of the loss to human lives, and also even in terms of the state's capacity to sustain itself. The state itself emerged out of the situation weaker than it ever was.
Although the march was intended to be just for one day, it was not intended to disrupt classes. The intention was to march to demonstrate that all the schools in Soweto did not want Bantu education. But once violence broke out, it became clear that we could no longer go back to schools. And of course then the state also then closed the schools.
Battles between police and school children left over 500 dead.
We hadn't expected the authorities to react the way they did. They began hunting those they believed were inciters. They started first by arresting the leadership of SASO, BPC, and then targeting those who were members of the action committee in different schools.
I knew that the police had been looking for me. I had received so many reports, but I thought maybe for this night only they would not come. And I got home. I think by the time I got home it would have been about quarter past 12. By 25 to 1 there were knocks all over, all the windows and the doors. They were there. And for the first time, I tell you, all of us black consciousness people, there was no one who had the guts to resist. We were told to trouser, take off our trousers. They were searching us, all of us, taking off our trousers. And we were thrown into single cells at Modabi prison, told never to talk to each other. For that day, all of us were so scared. We were quiet for several hours, but at night we decided to break the silence, to defy them. We started talking.
When these young fellows in 1976 started coming into prison, they literally turned the prison upside down. we thought we were militant, so at least I thought. I thought I was militant. But this young generation was in another dimension. There was no authority in prison. They just defied from beginning to end.
Hundreds and hundreds of young, militant, black consciousness youth spent years on Robben Island under the tutelage of people like Govan Mbeki and emerged as powerful Congress supporters. They'd not necessarily gone in as that.
In Robben Island, I was part of the political committee. I was chairperson of the political committee during the duration of my years on Robben Island. And I remember, for instance, on Robben Island, there were about 120 or so members of the Black Consciousness Movement. And by the time, within 2 years, within 18 months, the number was reduced to about 23.
BCM was not different from the Youth League of the 40s. Angry, militant young people who were grappling with, political theory. BCM was doing exactly what, under different conditions, what the young activists of the 40s had done. Tambo, Mandela, Limbete, Sisulu, who moved the ANC out of, the politics of just mild protest to politics of challenge. So these young people felt that, you see, yes, you have got to combine in a dynamic manner political work, mobilization, but with also armed struggle. And the ANC and this alliance was able to provide this to the young members of the Black Consciousness Movement.
Young people were coming out by the 100 for military training. We didn't have the facilities to handle so many at the time, but we had to organize ourselves and provide training. Yet others were really too young to be military trained. There was another area of training that our people needed, and that was academic. And so we began to conceive of the idea of establishing a school to take in the young people who had been forced out of school. That is how we developed what was later to become the Solomon Mahlangu Freedom College.
It introduced a new sense of urgency for us to act in the military sphere. Because you must remember that between 1963 and 1976 or 77, no shot was fired in anger inside the country. We hadn't succeeded in getting personnel back. We hadn't succeeded in creating new MK units inside the country. We hadn't succeeded in acting against the enemy. And it was that uprising in 76 which injected this new drive to get going.
In 1976, unarmed school children were fighting with stones against guns. So I see the necessity to go out and take guns and face a gun with a gun.
Our people, the African majority, have become convinced and have realized out of their own bitter experience that they will have to reply the gun by the gun, and that the thousands of young people who were murdered in June 1976 shall surely be avenged.
The significance of the 1976 uprising was that the government actually produced one of the most rebellious generation of African youth.
The uprisings had an unparalleled impact internationally. This was not an uprising which could be hidden and obscured. The world was appalled. The world was angry. And this led to the stiffening of sanctions. South Africa was condemned at the United Nations and many other world fora.
It's in the aftermath of 1976 that, for instance, you get the imposition of the arms embargo. Because here was a matter directly in front of people. Children were being shot in the streets. buy these guns which his regime was able to buy everywhere else. Given that intensity of the struggle, the sanctions, as they would come via legislation, as governmental decisions, come also in the aftermath of this.
In 1977, in July, I went down to King Williamstown to have an in-depth discussion with Steve about the future of the country, about his vision for the future.
I personally would like to see less groups. I'd like to see groups like ANC, PAC, and the Black Consciousness Movement deciding to form one liberation group. And it is only, I think, when black people are so dedicated and so united in their cause that we can effect the greatest results.
I saw Steve Biko as one of the greatest sons of South Africa. I've said this before and I repeat it, that if Steve Biko had not died, he could easily have become a Prime Minister and a State President of a new South Africa.
Steve Biko died from a series of brutal assaults while in police custody.
Steve died, it was like the death of a personal friend. We in South Africa will never be able to overcome the terrible injustices that we have inflicted not only upon the black community, but upon ourselves as a white community by what we did to Steve Biko.
One of the reasons that Biko was killed is that the police discovered that Biko was in fact maintaining contact with the ANC. And they thought that he knew more about structures of the ANC in the country than he in fact did. But they thought he was hiding that information, so they were beating him up, torturing him and so on, to extract information which he didn't have.
This Black Conscious Movement turned into quite a serious threat to them, and they started on these different measures of curbing, of breaking, of smothering this movement, up till the point of 1977, where they finally banned the whole lot of them.
Revolutionary greetings, comrades and fellow compatriots. You are now tuned to Radio Freedom, the voice of the ANC and the People's Army, Umkhonto we Sizwe. We are broadcasting from the Sina of Radio Zambia in
I was confined to this shack in Elsie's River, and I had this long-range radio, and I used to listen to Duma Nokwe broadcasting Fire and Lightning, the sounds of the revolution, after 6 o'clock every evening. And there I could hear this man talking about an organization which has committed itself to fight for the liberation of the oppressed of South Africa, that it had been formed in 1912, that it had certain definite objectives, and I could identify with those objectives, and I tried to find out more.
What was attractive in terms of ANC politics was the fact that the ANC was seriously engaging the enemy physically within South Africa. We were beginning now to train people outside the country, and we're sending them back into the country.
I was connected
of course, with the first unit that went into the country, and that was Solomon Mahlangu and his comrade. I still have a very clear memory of seeing Solomon and his comrade in Mao Zedong Avenue in Maputo at 4 in the morning when they had their knapsacks and came to say goodbye on their journey into South Africa. The capture and the wound of Solomon, the wounding of his comrade, was depressing. Especially when it first happens. Of course, one knows when he's engaged in a war, there are going to be casualties, it's inevitable. But it's not always as simple as that, because that's an abstract concept. When you actually get to know people, when you are with them day and night at a base camp, discussing the operation, you get to know them, you get to love them as individuals, become friendly with one another. So therefore, each casualty of that sort becomes a special wound.
After the burnings of 1977, I think people began to reflect, particularly because the BC was, the formations of the BC were mainly student, were mainly middle class, and therefore were unable to reach the mass of the people. And I think people began to reflect as to how can they begin to organize their communities, their neighbors, and everybody, you know, in a sense, to have a mass approach to organization.
One of the first sectors to advance their level of organization was the independent trade union movement, when in 1978 they came together under a new banner, the Federation of South African Trade Unions, FOSATU.
We had different schools of thought within FOSATU. There were those who believed that a trade union would remain a trade union and it would fight for the recognition agreement, fight for the rights of workers in the plant, and that's it. And there was this other school of thought which said, whatever we've achieved in the factory gets drained in the township because of high rents, electricity rates, you know, bus fares and whatever. So we needed to be involved in the township in trying to force the authorities.
In order to improve the quality of life of the people in the townships, one had to address the working conditions at the workplace. So that link became crucial. And of course the state saw all this as being reflecting some of the demands that are enshrined in the Freedom Charter.
The link between the unions and politics emerged clearly at the funeral of the unionist Neil Agate.
In a country where the police don't allow the workers to belong to the trade unions they want to, then Neil was a criminal for wanting that. And Neil saw that the workers' lives didn't end at the factory gate at 5 o'clock. He saw that there was no democracy anywhere in South Africa. And he saw that for democratic unions, there must be a democratic country. So Neil fought for democracy in South Africa.
When organizing, I think people saw in the Freedom Charter a document that were able to guide the manner in which they were organizing, the issues around which to organize, and also linking those sectoral and local issues to national demand for freedom. At that time, then the civics began to emerge, the student organizations, sectoral organizations, student, youth, women, and so on.
Insofar as the student body is concerned, perhaps our main difference, our break with the past student movement was that we realized that the students are in no way the vanguard in the struggle. You see, the vanguard is the working people.
The struggles which were fought then concerned the broader community. The red meat boycott was the support of the community for the demands of the meat workers, where the entire industry in the Western Cape went on strike. And we had number of meetings in various communities, getting workers to explain why they had gone on strike and why they need the support of the community. Thousands of rands were collected to pay strike pay to the workers. The bus boycott, workers generally and commuters were affected by the increase in bus prices. So most of the sectors of the oppressed community were actively involved in opposition to the government at that point.
Out of the explosion of political organizations in the early 80s, the ANC began to re-emerge more overtly into the public arena, particularly with initiatives such as the Release Mandela campaign, which gained massive support throughout South Africa.
The 80s were a period of a giant awakening of our people. Historically, it would always be regarded as such. Organizations were springing out. Strikes became a feature of our struggle in this country. Youth organizations were mushrooming all over the place, and as well as women's formations. Militarily, we began now to impact inside the country. We attacked their major oil installation at Sasol. We went for their military headquarters. We attacked police stations at a number of points. We planted explosives and destroyed their installations. We began to be active not only in the Transvaal, but Natal and the Cape and the Free State. It was clear that the ANC now had established itself and was ready to fight a protracted war.
This total onslaught in the spheres of propaganda, in the economic field, psychologically, undermining and military threats against us, with a positive policy to maintain our security, our economic progress, and our action to maintain freedom.
They got nervous. They were angry. They worked out a new strategy. And that strategy was to engage us outside South Africa. They decided to defy international law and to adopt methods of hot pursuits across borders. In 1981, they sent units of the SADF to go and kill as many of our people inside the street, including refugees. Because their intelligence was faulty, they thought that I was in the country. They tried to attack the flat where I used to stay, but just a flat away from my own, they attacked, convinced that I was in that flat and killed the locals. They were crazy. They decided that they were going to take off their gloves and that they were going to kill anybody who harbored us, who was unfortunate to stay next to us, whether he was a Mosotho, a Motswana, a Zimbabwean. That was the nature of the frenzy existing in Pretoria.
In May 1981, the government staged a series of activities to mark the 20th anniversary of the White Republic. It was an arrogant display of might and wealth in opposition to the aspirations of the black people.
On the eve of the so-called celebrations of the 20th anniversary of the Republic, we have roadblocks all over. We ask ourselves the question, why? Because freedom is knocking at our door. We will also expect more repression, but the cause should go forward that we'll have freedom in our lifetime. We say an injury to one is an injury to all.
What I say is that I'm not prepared to accept a system of one man, one vote and majority government in South Africa.
In 1983, the state called the whites-only referendum in an attempt to stem the tide of black opposition. Its purpose was to gain approval from whites for limited political rights to be given to colored and Indians. Blacks rejected the white referendum. Instead, they organized hundreds of organizations to form the United Democratic Front. The UDF symbolized both a rejection of racist rule and a return to the traditions and political program of the ANC.
The time has come for white people in this country to realize that their destiny is inextricably bound with our destiny. And that they shall never be free until we are free. And I